As we begin to get started with Python, I think it's kind of important to remind ourselves of the importance of programming in the field of data science, machine learning, and AI. I mean, at the end of the day, you need to implement in some language. And the language for now that we have chosen is Python. Now, as we're getting into Python, we need to ask a few questions. The why, the what, and the how. Why should you use Python? What can you do with Python? And how can we actually get started with Python? When we're looking at the why Python, the first thing that actually comes to mind is readability. Compared to other programming languages, Python is actually quite easy to read and to write. It's a sort of reasonably close approximation to English. It's not, I mean, you don't think English when you're writing a program in Python, but it's quite easy to read and write, almost as if you're reading and writing a passage in English. The second reason why it's a useful language to work with is that it is platform independent. So essentially what that means is it doesn't matter which operating system you're working with, you have support across all platforms. The third important reason is that it is open source. Now, because it is open source, it has a very, very large community. And if it has a large community, which means that it has a lot of support. So if you're ever stuck with a question, you're often wondering, what should I do? Or how can I get help with this? Or where can I find this out? There's a very good chance that somebody else has already asked that question, and that question has already been answered by the sort of large open source community. Now get to the point of what can I actually do with Python. Now, one big use case is software development. So in software development, think of sort of your typical business applications, right? So that's your sort of digitization process, so to speak. So that's one great use case where Python can be used. The second use case is scientific applications, in particular with data and AI. So there's a lot of support that you have in Python when you're working with data and AI. And the third is databases. It's very easy to work with databases. So if you think about it, you have the digitization process, which creates data. So you need to be able to work with data easily. But then on top of that, you also want to develop models and draw insights from that data. So all of these three are readily available in Python. The software development, which leads to digitization, working with databases, and working with scientific applications, in particular with big data, machine learning, and AI. Now let's get to the point of how, right? So we've given a motivation of why you would want to work with Python. We've given a sense of what you can actually do with Python. You're like, great, okay, we're sort of convinced, at least initially convinced. So now the question is, what do I need to do? I mean, what are the tools that I need to have? What do I need to have to actually get started? So there are two things that you actually need to have. One is an IDE, an integrated development environment. And there are many such environments that are available in Python, Jupyter, Replit, and many others. And all of them are, or a lot of them are actually quite simple to use. One of the things that we will use, one of the IDEs that we will use is Replit. We think it's quite easy to use, especially when you want to get started with Python. But the choice, frankly, is yours. Choose whatever IDE that you're comfortable with. At the early stages of programming, what is also quite useful to have is a visualization tool to understand what's sort of going on at the back end of the code. And so a tool like Python Tutor turns out to be very useful in that regard. So how do we get started with Python? What do we actually need? As I said, we need two things. One is an IDE, choice is yours, we'll use Replit. And the other one, which turns out to be quite useful, is a visualization tool for the code, which is Python Tutor. So with that, we're actually absolutely ready to get started on a journey with Python.